My name is Mark House, and I'm the Senior Product Manager here at RM. This is a re-recording of the presentation I made last week at the Association of Directors of Education Scotland conference event. So day one of the conference was very much focused on liberating learning, led by Santiago, and was hugely inspiring to everybody who was in attendance. Day two tend to have a bit more focus on accountability. There were some presentations by, for example, Graham Logan and Claire Hicks from Education from the Scottish Government. And we can see that a lot of the focus was about comparing standards within local authorities and also between local authorities. And this balance between the desire to liberate learning and accountability is something that myself and the small team of innovators here at RM have been focusing on. So in this talk, we're going to talk a little bit about why we think assessment is the key to learning liberation and accountability, why things are the way they are, how adaptive comparative judgment could unlock some of the things we want to happen, and then a brief piece about what we're doing with something called Compare Demand. So let's get going. So why do we think assessment is the key to liberating learning? Well, if we think that learning is a three-legged stool, those three legs are curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. And I visit lots and lots of conferences, and if I look down the agenda, I can see that perhaps out of 10 talks, maybe 4 on curriculum, 5 on pedagogy, and 1 is on assessment. So why is that? Well, for educators, certainly the passion that they have when they walk in the door each day is very much around curriculum and pedagogy. It's the thing that they can see that makes an immediate difference to the children if we want to liberate and increase learning. Assessment, on the other hand, is perhaps not something that teachers feel that they own or possibly understand. However, assessment, out of the three of them, I would argue is the most influential. It's the one that has washback. This is where we think about teaching to the test. And because we treasure what we measure, both the curriculum and the pedagogy is then steered by whichever way we assess. Now, I'm very fortunate because I get to go to different countries and talk to really interesting people. And the balance here between the liberating learning and accountability is something we're sort of seeing everywhere. So I've been to Lithuania and Ireland and Wales and England, Singapore, Sweden. And there's sort of a recognition that as things change here, we need to encourage learners to be more diverse in their responses. We need to empower teachers to teach within their context and do what they think is the best for the children in their school and their community. But at the same time, we've got this accountability issue hanging over us. The thing about assessment is, assessment, if it's not set up properly, can actually deliver the reverse of what we're looking for here. Instead of liberating learning, it can actually constrain it. An example here is the fact that perhaps I could be a better footballer than Lionel Messi if we take the wrong assessment route. I used to teach for many years A-level and GCSE physical education, and if you took a practical activity like soccer, the way that you grade the children is you would have a rubric, and you'd look at the student and you'd mark them against the rubric. And the thing about soccer is, to achieve the top marks, the player had to be able to kick the ball with both feet. And anybody who's watched Lionel Messi in the past knows that he can only kick the ball with one foot. So if we were to grade Lionel Messi and myself on using the mark scheme, it would not be unexpected that I would score marks with Lionel Messi. And while I'm an enthusiastic soccer player, I don't think that's the correct answer here. Before I visited the conference last Friday, the previous day I went to Glasgow City College. For anybody who's not been, it's a pretty amazing place. And they're focused very much on skills, not exclusively, but a large part of what they do is teaching skills. And I was fortunate to have a bit of a tour around the institution, take a look at various aspects of it. And at one point, I ended up right at the top here, right at the top of the 10th floor, and I went to the furniture department. And it was hugely impressive because the students were clearly very skilled, and so was the instructor. And at one point, I was able to look at a couple of pieces of work. They were um, cupboards to go on a wall, effectively, like display cabinets. And it was clear from what I could see, and I think everybody else who was there, that one was superior to the other. One looked a little bit like a flat-packed sort of IKEA type affair, but the other one looked like a proper piece of furniture with a high degree of skill in the build and the design of this object. And I asked the instructor which one was in fact the better piece of work. And the instructor said to me, well, it sort of depends what you mean by better. And that immediately flummoxed me a bit. Well, what do you mean? And he said, well, if we look at the mark scheme, actually the one that you're considering to be least good would score higher. And the reason it would score higher is that it ticks off more boxes than the one that you have assumed is the better one. And this is another example, perhaps, of where the way that we assess can really influence the way that things are taught and even the curriculum. Now, we have some people who work out in Sweden, and they've taken a look at this and have started to do some holistic teaching, which we'll come on to a bit more in a moment. And one of the things they did is they set up a little project where they asked the students to design a backpack. And when they first set the task, what they found was that the students came back. There were about 30 students, and they ended up with 30 backpacks, which were all very similar. And when they dug into it, the reason they found that all of the backpacks were very similar was because the students were aware of the rubric of the mark scheme and simply designed a backpack that they thought would score the most marks in the mark scheme. And later on, they repeated this task, but instead of getting the students to understand the mark scheme, what they did instead is they asked the students to design a backpack which would be for 8-year-olds, and it needed to meet certain criteria, such as being able to carry their lunch, their sports kit, and their books, and it needed to be weatherproof and various other criteria. And what they found then when they set this is that they managed to get 30 responses of wildly different bags. So the responses were very diverse, and we had some children who invented or designed a bag on wheels, other ones had one strap, some had two straps, different materials being used. So we really did encourage that sort of creative response because of the way that we set the task. Now, the challenge here, of course, is assessment. How can we possibly assess 30 wildly different bags? It seems much easier if the bags are in some way similar. So as I mentioned, this sort of takes a holistic approach. And one way to look at this, some of the things that helps, is the idea of what we call being a connoisseur. And the guy on the left is a guy called Bender Grosvenor. Bender Grosvenor is an art connoisseur, and he wrote a fantastic piece a little while ago called On Connoisseurship. And in it, he made the point that when we look at things like art, we really should be taking a whole view of them. And he's very critical of the way that a lot of um, uh, people from the art world don't really see the true value in something, because instead of taking a holistic view of it, they break it down into bits. So they will, for example, look at the frame and the materials, and they'll grind into lots of different bits of it, and then they'll give a view of the painting or the picture. But Bender's argument is that you frequently end up with something that doesn't really, you end up with a critique that isn't really a true reflection of that picture. Bender actually is employed um, frequently to uncover misappropriated masterpieces. So these are masterpieces where people have taken an approach where they've tried to pick apart the painting, and in so doing have declared that the picture is not from the original artist. However, Bender has frequently turned this upside down by taking a look at the whole picture in it by way of being a connoisseur, taking a holistic view, and in fact reappropriating that picture. The way he does it, of course, is the way he looks at lots and lots of pictures, and he tries to look for sort of similarities between the one he's seeing and the one he's seen in the past. I can highly recommend that as a read. The other thing about that we're seeing in different countries is the need for people to be able to assess people when they're ready. And the current assessment framework tends to assess, it requires that people are assessed when the test is ready rather than when the learner is ready. And this takes us towards this concept of an on-demand assessment. We sort of know that measuring children by the age they are is perhaps not as effective at the stage they are. And what we want to do here is come up with some sort of way of assessing people when they can be assessed when they're ready to be assessed. Finally, on this, there's something that we're hearing a lot of at the moment, which seems to be claiming that we don't really need to worry about assessment much more because the robots are coming and artificial intelligence is going to be doing all the assessment. I wrote a piece a little while ago about how this may not be entirely the way that things will pan out. Certainly when it comes to being judged, people do like to have a human element to it. And while there may be a place to play for perhaps machine learning or AI, the role of a human in judging other humans or teachers judging students, we believe is always going to be there. However, we also know this judging process is just really, really difficult. And one of our co-creators, or one of the people that we work with, is a guy called Professor Richard Kimball. He said, look, all of this would be much easier if you're trying to assess things. It'd be much easier if we could just help the people doing the assessing to know what good looks like. The way they'll know what good looks like is if they can get some familiarity with a national sample. So taking all that into rounder, the fact that we think that the current the way we assess, the way that we break things down into bits is perhaps not as effective than taking a holistic view. The way that we want to be able to test people by stage rather than age, and the fact that AI is never going to solve all this. Perhaps what we should be doing and focusing on instead is what Richard is saying here, and that's sort of what we're going to get onto as we go through this task a little bit, through this talk. So why are things the way they are, and why have they always been that way? So this is me some time ago. No, it wasn't in 1792, but it was a while ago. And it wouldn't really matter when I went to school between 1792 and 2022. The way I would be assessed would have been pretty similar. That's because of this guy on the right here. Now, on the left is one of the Cambridge colleges, and pre 1792, the way that students were assessed was quite different. What happened was that there would have been a deadline for the students' work, and the students would have handed their work into this college on that deadline. Then, of one evening, all of the professors and the lecturers would gather together the work in a single room, and they would lay it out around the tables in the room, and then they would do a comparative ranking exercise between them. In other words, they'd look at two pieces of work and declare whether they thought one piece of work was better than the other. They do that multiple times until they get a rank order. Later on in the evening, they would post that rank order on the door outside, and that would be it. The guy on the right hand side is called William Farish, and he became the proctor in 1792, and he could see a number of problems with that existing system. In particular, there were issues of scale, the fact that there were more and more students arriving at Cambridge, and the way that this current process was running was just not going to be something which would allow the university to grow. So what he said instead is, well, what we could do instead is actually assess the pieces of work against a standardized test, and we could apply marks and then grades. And really, that has then set us on our way the next 230 years. Now, during that time, a number of people worked out that there were ways that we could perhaps improve things a little bit. The guy on the left here is a guy called Francis Galton. Francis Galton is important for many reasons, but one of the things that he talked a lot about was the idea of wisdom of the crowd, and the fact that if we assess on our own, we're probably going to differ from other people we're assessing with, and therefore we need to get together every now and again to standardize these marks. And that sort of led to this idea of moderation. So, which is all good, but even with things such as the wisdom of the crowd and moderation, we can still see that we've got some real challenges here with the way that we're currently marking and grading. Marking is challenging enough. The being able to get multiple people to agree a mark, it's just really difficult. If two or three people look at the same script and the same mark scheme, they are probably going to differ quite a bunch, and we can see that here in the different marks which are typically given. However, this gets even worse when we think about grading. When we start grading work, we very quickly end up in extremely worrying reliability between grades. And I can recommend a really good book that came out this summer called Missing the Mark by Dennis Sherwood, where he really takes this, goes in depth on this and explains how and why this problem is the way it is. Interestingly, he talks a lot about the idea of assessing fuzzy subjects and how much more difficult it is to do that. And we can see that on this graph here, just how challenging it is to assess reliably those subjects we might describe as fuzzy. And this is something that we are definitely interested in doing here. So on average, across all subjects at GCSE, AS and A-level, about 1 grade in 4 is wrong. For every 100 candidates sitting A-level English language, English literature and history, about 20 receive a certificate on which all 3 grades are right. About 80 are awarded at least 1 wrong grade. So why does this keep happening? Why is it that we've got this level of unreliability despite all of the ways that we think we're making things better? So it really sort of comes down to the point that we're just not that great at judging things. Another fantastic book that came out very recently was a book by Daniel Kahneman, called The Flaw in Human Judgment. Kahneman, you may know from a very influential book called Thinking Fast and Slow a few years ago. And this book, he dedicates it to why people are just really bad at making judgments. He does a nice piece in explaining the difference between noise and bias, and the fact that marking in the educational context is often extremely noisy and is sometimes biased also. And the consequences of that for the people being judged can be quite profound. Now, he doesn't just look at education, he looks at the law, medicine, and various other aspects, and it's always the same. If we're asked to judge things, we find it extremely difficult. It's called Louis Thurstone, and in the 1930s, he came up with this idea of comparative judgment. What he realized was that yes, we're not very good at judging things. So if we're asked to judge things against a rubric, for example, we're going to struggle. And he called those absolute judgments. However, if we are asked to judge one thing against another, then we're actually really good at that. And he called this the principle of the law of comparative judgment. So, for example, if a person walks into a room and there are already 5 people in the room, and those 5 people need to guess or judge how tall that person is, it's highly likely that there's going to be a difference of opinion. However, if 2 people walk in the room and the question is instead which person is taller, it's likely the 5 people will agree. And this understanding of comparative judgment can really help us, we think, in changing the way that we assess, particularly around those fuzzy, hard-to-reach subjects. So, actually, the idea of comparing stuff with a group of people would just seem a really good idea. And if we could employ the knowledge that we've learned a little bit from William Galton here and Thurstone, then that would seem to be perhaps a basis for improving things here. And that's really underpins the work that we've been doing around adaptive comparative judgment. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to nip into a demonstration quickly of adaptive comparative judgment so you can see what it is right now. Okay, let me get my demonstration up on here. Okay, so and let's nip across to this screen over here. Okay, so we're going to log into RM Compare. And what we can see here is that I have already set up a session here. It's called ADES at the top here. And in this particular session, we're just using one judge, which is me, just to demonstrate the process. But we've actually got some web documents that we put in. That Compare can take in web documents, or it can take in video, and we'll see some of that in a little while. But in this particular case, what we've got here is we've got a few digital art journals, okay, and some of them are built in Google, and some of them built in PowerPoint. It makes a difference. And what happens is that we load in the items, we put the judges in, and then we can start running the sessions. Okay, just here. Now, in this particular case, I've invited myself as a judge. So if I come to my judging here and start judging, what the system will do is it will start to pair up two items. And what I need to do as a judge is I need to decide which one best meets the holistic statement that we're running against. So in this case, it is what is the most creative portfolio? And often we're asked, well, is it actually possible to assess creativity? Well, it is if you ask a question, set it up like this. In this particular case, I can say, well, I've had a look at them and clearly I've spent a bit more time on this, but I think this one is the most creative one. And if I want to, I can actually leave a comment here to describe why I think it's the most creative. And for now, I'm just going to write thought. And then what it does, it brings up the next two, and this is the process that we continue with. Okay. So that's the sort of judgment. That's the sort of the way that we do comparative judgment. We see two things and we judge one above the other. So let's have a look at a session which that process has been done more extensively. And in here we've got a session where we had 129 files and 36 judges. The files in this case were handwriting. Yeah. And 29 judges would have been a mixture of teachers and other experts, and they're all up here. And they would have done that comparative process as I illustrated a few moments ago. And we can start to see the reports here. Now, in comparative judgment, we have this concept of rounds. And in a round, what it means is that each piece of work has been seen at least once by one of the judges. And clearly, when we start off a session, we don't actually know the relative merit of each piece of work. And instead, they come up at random. However, relatively quickly, the algorithm will kick in and it'll start to understand what the judges are agreeing or disagreeing on. And we can see already, even in this early stage, that we've got some sort of shape between what we think is the best, what we think is the worst. So what this means is the algorithm is now no longer going to be pairing up, for example, this one, because we're pretty sure already that this one is better than that one. However, there are others that we do want to pair up, and these are ones that we're less certain about. Some of them still have very high levels of uncertainty, and these ones are going to be paired up to see if we can get more certain about things. What we can do, however, is even by about round 9 here, we're getting extremely high levels of reliability and confidence. So by the time each piece of work has been seen 9 times, the confidence is extremely high. And we can increase that by doing more rounds of judgment if we want. And then I can actually see perhaps which one the judging pool thinks is the best. Do this one. Oops. So back in here. Try that again. And which one we think is the worst. So you can get an idea of each one. The other thing that the reports does is that enables us to understand how the judges saw things. Now, it's important to understand that there's no sort of right or wrong here. This is really a description of agreement. Did most of the judges see things relatively the same? And here they are. We've got perhaps one teacher which we might want to go and take a look at, and what we could do is look at the way they judged. If we had a teacher which was highly misfitting, we'd probably want to go and take a look at that teacher to find out, well, why are they seeing things different to everybody else? On items, we can do the same. were any of the items harder for the judging pool to agree on? In general, there's relatively high levels of agreement here, but again, if we had an item which was sitting outside, we may want to go and take a look at that piece of work and see if we can understand why it is that people find it hard to agree on those. Okay, so that's sort of comparative judgment as it is at the moment. Immensely powerful tool. You can do lots and lots of different things with it. But there are a few challenges with what's happening on that, and I'm just going to talk through that very quickly. So sort of got a couple of challenges with the way that comparative judgment is set up at the moment. And one of them is the fact that there's quite a lot to do before you can get going on your judging. In the example I showed you last, I think there were about 130 items and 29 people to get lined up. And you can see that there could be quite a few challenges with that. Maybe some of the pieces of work are missing when we start the session, or maybe some of the judges go sick and can't do the work, and suddenly the ones that remain have to do more work than is reasonably acceptable. So we know that if we're going to run very, very large standardization sessions, perhaps across regions or even entire countries, we have to find a way to make them more manageable. And the second thing is that when we get our rank and we get the rank order there, right now, we have to treat that as a bit of a siloed entity. We can't really compare one rank with another. So this makes assessing, for example, things like progress over time, incredibly challenging, and also between different subjects, for example, makes it extremely hard. But we think there is a way around this, and that's what I'm keen to sort of show you next. Okay. And this is the concept of compare on demand. And in an on-demand world, what we're going to do is we're going to take those ranks and we're going to turn them into rulers. So once we create a rank, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to put new items against that rank and treat it as a ruler. And what we have is I have a proof of concept which is available for people to use, and I'm just going to show it to you now so that you can see how that behaves. So let me share onto a different screen. So, okay, so we've moved onto the screen here. This is the compare website, and you can find it through compare.rm.com. And if I come to the on-demand area here, down here is our POC. Okay, so what we've done in the POC is we have imagined an organization which has created some rulers, and the rulers are here. So in this case, they've created one around creativity, one around critical thinking, one around information literacy. This on-demand process can be done singly or with a bunch of people. But for the example I'm going to give you here, we're going to look at this middle one. So we're going to use a ruler to try and assess critical thinking, and in this case, it's going to be a video example. So here's an example of the ruler, and what the ruler would tell you would be how confident we are in that ruler, how many items are in there, how many times been used, how we made the ruler, what we're going to use to assess against the ruler, how many grading is done, what assessment that there is backing up this ruler, and even how to set up your video recording to put your items against the ruler. So let's start the new assessment. we'll log into RM Compare, give it a name. And as I said earlier, in this case, we're just going to have a single judge. So this is the case where maybe it's a teacher or an individual marker who wants to do this assessment and not do it collaboratively. So I'm going to have to add in my video. So here's my student. I'm going to add in my video. And what I might want to do is just add a bit more information about that student from the MIS. And the thing to realize is that because I'm not creating a rank and instead I'm just comparing against it, I can get this done way quicker. So in the example we saw earlier, you may need 12 or 14 judgments to get some sort of reliability. Here, we can do it in between 4 or 6 judgments. It sort of depends whether I just want to grade or the exact place in the rank, but it's going to be way less work to get this done. It'll give me a quick summary of my session, and now we're good to go. So on the left here is my student, and here's one that's come off the ruler. And I'm going to check my holistic statement. I'm going to make a judgment, and I'm going to decide which one I think is better. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is continue on to the next one. It's going to bring up another one from the ruler to compare against mine. Now, obviously, what we should have understood by now is that this is no longer a random item from the ruler. This item has been informed by that first judgment. And I'm going to make a judgment again and say it's in that. Continue. And another one, same thing, continue in each case. And now we should be getting it now somebody who's perhaps quite close to my student. For this process, this guy here is probably going to be a similar type quality. The decision is a bit tougher to make, but I'm going to make the decision, click continue. And then what I might do is add a little bit of feedback that I want to add into this process, continue, and it will generate report. So what do we have here? We've got Claire Smith, and the system has told me that we're pretty sure that this student would be a medium grade. The grading here might be any grading method that we want to apply. We can see where Claire is on the rank of this 250 students, so Claire is sort of roughly in the middle here. But we could also get a look at where she is in my school year group. And what it could do is it could tell you, for example, to give you an example of students which are a bit like this particular student, and it could even set a stretch target here. And what we could also do is add in the feedback. The reporting can get richer. So here we have images of progress over time across different things that the student has been assessed against. And we can perhaps put different items together to get a more general profile. If we want to, we could even map it over time to see how the student is performing as things progress. And if we want, of course, we can do that in a line chart or a bar chart, etc. Exactly like that. So through that process, hopefully you can see that we now have a system which is just much faster than anything we've had before. It's incredibly reliable still, and it has the potential to have massive output and throughput. In other words, you could have a ruler which could be used simultaneously across entire regions, countries, or even the world. So, what if you know a bit more? So, if you'd like to know some more, here are some of the things that you can do right now. You can just have a look around the Compare website that you've seen a couple of times on this presentation here, that goes to compare.rm.com. You can, as I say, access the POC from that site. And there's also a free trial, which you can sign up right away and start using Compare. And there is also a mobile version as well, which again uses the on-demand principle, but you can use it from your phone. We're currently working with partners all over the world, but we're looking for more. If you think what you've seen here today is interesting and you'd like to join us, please just get in touch. You can contact me direct at mhouse@rm.com. If not, you can find me on LinkedIn or find me on Twitter. So that's it, really. We think that there is some real potential here to think about assessing differently than perhaps we've done in the past 230 years. And we think that a comparative approach will enable us to properly liberate learning while maintaining accountability. It'll help to liberate the curriculum, it'll help to liberate the pedagogy, but at the same time deliver us those standardized scores and the understanding of relative performance that we obviously need and we want. Thank you very much.